Last week, Trump started what he's calling the biggest deportation operation in history. And the operation is starting by focusing on people who have committed a crime in addition to entering the country illegally, but eventually its focus will expand to encompass everyone who is here illegally. Now, this is an emotionally activating time, and there's many people who will view these deportations as needless cruelty. If you're one of these people, this video is intended to help you understand what's going on and why many people consider it a necessity. And if you already agree with the deportations, this video is meant to help you bring clarity and put words to your feelings. Now, before I jump into the analysis, I want to make my potential bias and role clear. I am a person with a perspective, and I make these videos to help you understand that perspective and also to help you clarify your own. I also, of course, believe in my perspective, so I make this video to help influence you to what I think is the most helpful worldview. I'm not a news source, and you should absolutely listen to other perspectives and make up your mind for yourself. And also to declare any potential biases, I'm a first-generation immigrant. I was born in the Bronx, New York, and my parents immigrated here from Ghana legally. I believe that America is the greatest country on earth, and I think as justified by the fact that we have both the highest levels of legal and illegal immigration on earth. I also recognize that I have citizenship through no effort of my own, but instead the decisions that my parents made, and many of the people coming to America simply want to give their children the same thing that my parents gave me. Also note that in this video, I'm not going to be talking about securing the border or legal immigration. I'm specifically going to be tackling deportations because that's the area with the most emotional charge to it. So let's get into it. First, here's the status quo. There's anywhere from an estimated 10 to 22 million illegal immigrants in the US, with a few publications estimating even higher. In 1990, that population was only about 3.5 million. By 2000, the population doubled to 7 million. Immigration has been a hot button topic in America since Ronald Reagan granted about 2.7 million illegal immigrants amnesty in the 80s. It's persisted as an issue under Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, and continues to be an issue today. So it's continued to be an issue under both Democrats and Republicans. So how did we even get to this point? How did immigration take off as such a major issue? Well, it started to pick up in the 90s when a combination of a strong US economy, the collapse of the value of the Mexican peso, the expansion of industries that utilize illegal immigrants like agriculture and construction, as well as relatively loose border enforcement, all coalesced into a problem that we're still dealing with today. Now, in order to understand why the deportations are happening, I think it's also important to understand the case against deportations. So I'm going to make that case right here. There's two components to the anti-deportation argument, and I'm going to classify them as A, logical arguments, and B, humanitarian and emotional arguments, and they both matter. First argument is that huge numbers of these illegal immigrants are integrated with the domestic workforce in areas that have historically had labor shortages, like construction or agriculture. The second argument is that illegal immigrants do pay some taxes without getting all public benefits. The Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy, which is considered to have a left-of-center bias but high factual reporting, calculates that the average illegal immigrant pays about $9,000 in taxes every year. The third argument is that mass deportation would simply be expensive, especially if we're talking about the high end, like 22 or even 30 million illegal immigrants. As an aside, many people would also point out the fact that illegal immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than American citizens, and they speculate that's because they're already in the country illegally, so they have more to lose. Now let's get to the more humanitarian or emotional arguments. The first is that if you deport illegal immigrants who have US citizens as children, you're going to end up separating those parents from their kids. The second argument is that many of these illegal immigrants have been in the country for years or even decades. And at this point, they're integral parts of their communities, and many of them even have children who are US citizens due to birthright citizenship. And finally, many of these illegal immigrants fled dangerous conditions in their home countries. And if we were to deport them, we would end up putting them in less safe circumstances. The proposed solution that many in the anti-deportation camp would push for is either amnesty or just maintaining the status quo. And we have granted amnesty before. In 1986, Ronald Reagan signed a bill called the Immigration Reform and Control Act that granted amnesty to about 2.7 million immigrants, and that bill did have bipartisan support. So now that you have an overview of the argument against deportations, let me offer the argument for deportations. Now, before getting into any of this, I do want to acknowledge that this is an emotionally difficult thing to talk about for everyone in the country. And I think that's why people haven't been talking about it. Or if people do talk about it, they tend to focus on the more politically safe topic of violent criminals coming into the country. But the majority of illegal immigrants are not violent criminals, and there's still a question of what to do about them. So my hope in making this video is, even if you disagree with the deportations or disagree with me, we can at least arrive at a shared sense of reality and a mutual understanding of why this is happening to begin with. And we can do that while having genuine empathy for the people whose lives are going to be disrupted. So now that we've laid out the argument against deportations, let me lay out the argument for it. First, let's address the labor shortage question. Yes, it is true that illegal immigrants are filling key labor shortages in areas like agriculture, construction, and hospitality, and by filling those areas, all Americans benefit from lower costs of goods and services. However, they're doing it as second-class members of society, and they're making 60% of the wages that we consider a livable wage and have set laws to set a minimum wage around. They're doing it for below the minimum wage that we've collectively decided is the bottom end of a livable wage for living in America. So what's happening here is people are entering the country illegally. Companies are employing them illegally. They're getting paid below minimum wage illegally. And the government is ignoring that negligently. Yes, the labor shortage is a problem, but surely we can find a better solution than breaking our own laws and being complicit in it. Illegal immigrants are solving a problem, but the way that it's being solved is just creating even bigger problems. And I'll get to some of those bigger problems later in the video. But in the meantime, here's a solution. First, have companies pay legal wages to people who are in the country legally. If we still have a labor shortage, then import more people legally to get paid legal wages for doing those jobs. And if after all of that, there's still a shortage, use technology and market solutions to solve the remainder of the problem, like we have with pretty much every other problem in American history. Labor shortage is a problem, but there are better solutions available than the way that we're doing it right now. The second argument is that these illegal immigrants contribute in taxes. That's true, but often the people who make this argument are ignoring the actual cost of the social services that these illegal immigrants use. The Heritage Foundation, which is a right-of-center political think tank, estimates that the average immigrant household contributes about $10,000 in taxes, while also using about $24,000 in social services. This results in an annual fiscal deficit of about $14,000 per illegal immigrant household. Now, that's a right-leaning publication, but I wasn't able to find any left-leaning publications that did an earnest analysis of the comprehensive cost per illegal immigrant on the rest of American taxpayers. So essentially, the argument here is that even if illegal immigrants do contribute something to the economy, it's not outweighed by the cost of public services and social utilities that they also use. And if our society is not designed to accommodate second-class members of society, then we have situations like our healthcare system or our education system being overrun by an amount of people that it's simply not designed to accommodate. But all that aside, again, if illegal immigrants are here illegally, then they're second-class members of society. And we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want any member of society to not be able to use some of our services? The third argument was that mass deportation would be extremely expensive. And that's true. It would be. The American Immigration Council estimates that in order to deport 13 million people, it would cost us $315 billion. Now, American Immigration Council is left-leaning, but let's assume that's a reasonable estimation. We have to consider the cost of also keeping them here. The Federation for American Immigration Reform estimates that keeping this amount of legal immigrants in the country costs American taxpayers $150 billion every year. Now, that group is right-leaning, and frankly, I'm guessing that both of these organizations have some incentive to inflate their numbers. So assuming that they're directly accurate, the cost to deport illegal immigrants is high. The cost to keep them here is also high. And the cost to keep them here indefinitely will eventually be higher than the cost of deporting them one time. Now, there are other abstract arguments that are harder to quantify about the impact of removing illegal immigrants from the economy. For example, some people have reasonably argued that it would hurt GDP and cause the cost of services and goods to go up in the short to midterm. Now, that's really hard to model. So instead, I would ask you the question, what's the cost of preserving law and order? And that's something I'm going to talk about later in the video as well. But now let's get to the humanitarian and emotional arguments for not deporting illegal immigrants. Because to be honest, besides corporations, I don't think that the average American citizen is that committed to the economic reasons to keep illegal immigrants here. So let's address the humanitarian emotional arguments. The first is that parents and children could be separated during deportations. And this is a valid concern because that happened under both Obama and Trump. Regardless of what side you are on the debate, hopefully we can agree that we don't want children suddenly being separated from their parents. And we should hold Trump and our elected officials to making sure that happens as little as possible. And Tom Homan, the man leading up the deportation effort, did say that families can simply be deported together. Address the fact that, yes, if we deport a lot of these illegal immigrants, they're gonna go back to countries where they'll be less safe. And that's why they left those countries to begin with. And at the same time, there are people in those countries right now who are waiting to get into America the legal way. There are people who want the same exact things that these illegal immigrants want, but they're not willing to break the rules to get it. The US grants roughly 1.17 million legal immigrants with permanent residence in the US every year, and those people follow the rules. There are also 34.7 million legal green card applications from people who are waiting and following the rules to enjoy the same benefits that illegal immigrants are currently enjoying. Now, the right amount of immigration is not zero, but it's also not infinite, and we can't have everyone come here. So we need to be selective about who we allow to come here, and allowing people to break the rules to come here rather than having a lottery or a more merit-based system undermines the core reason that America is attractive in the first place. There are hundreds of millions of people around the world who would love to live in America. And the differences between people who are here as illegal immigrants and those people is those people aren't breaking the rules to have the better life that they want. And this brings me to what I think is actually the most important argument. And this argument is meant to address all of the humanitarian emotional concerns, as well as the logical concerns, as well as the concern that deporting these illegal immigrants is going to be disruptive to their lives. But first, an analogy. Have you ever been in a line that quickly degenerated into anything but a line? First, you arrive in the line and you have an expectation of fairness. So you wait in line and you don't cut. Then you might see one or two people cut in line and it bothers you, but you ignore it because you don't want to cause a fuss. Then you see another person do it, and then dozens, and then 50, 100. How long are you going to watch that happen before you decide to just cut the line yourself? Civilization is the same way. Society is the same way. And a lot of this illegal immigration conversation can get abstract. But if you think of America as a community, things get a lot clearer. Communities require cooperation to function, and rules support that cooperation. If rules are not followed, then cooperation becomes difficult. If cooperation breaks down, then society breaks down, and all of a sudden, the community is not as desirable to live in for those in the community or those desiring to get into the community. And this is particularly important with foundational laws, because if people aren't even following the foundational laws for what is required to get into the country, why should people in the country even pay their taxes? Why would you pay tax money if you know that that tax money is going to support people who are not following the same rules you are and are not contributing tax money in equal proportion? I think we can all agree that America is in one of the lowest trust periods in its lifetime. And part of the reason why is because people see laws and rules not being followed. And if you see that rules are not being followed or enforced, it's hard to trust society. When people stop following the rules because they see that they're not being followed, they're not going to follow the rules or the government that's supposed to enforce them. But zooming out from America for a second, why are so many people leaving their home countries where they have a familiar culture, familiar language, deep-rooted communities to come to America instead? Because their countries are also communities, and those communities are not being well run. Many of them are places where the laws are not properly constructed nor properly enforced, and that's reflected in the crime rates among other social and economic metrics. There are places with corrupt governments who are not keeping promises to their people and have low levels of trust. Look, America has its problems, but people want to live here more than anywhere else. That's why we have the highest amounts of both legal and illegal immigration in the world. And if we continue to allow people to live here illegally, we erode the foundation of trust, rules, law, and order that makes America so desirable to live in the first place. Now, on another note, part of what's so emotionally difficult for people is seeing mothers crying, or children in distress, or fathers being locked up as they're forcibly removed from the country. That actually makes it even more important that we fix the entire system of incentives that's creating incentives for illegal immigration in the first place. One of the things that we need to address is birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship was introduced when it was ratified through the 14th Amendment in 1868. The original intention of birthright citizenship was to grant citizenship to the children of freed slaves. It was never intended to give citizenship to the children of people who broke the laws to get into America in the first place. And it makes sense that when they put in place the 14th Amendment, they didn't really foresee this happening because at the time, federal enforcement of a southern border wasn't really a thing. But now that we have this incentive, people are willing to risk dangerous border crossings just to get into the country and have a child here. And it's also being abused by high-income immigrants, like many Chinese nationals who are coming to the US, paying $30,000 to $100,000 to be put up in nice hotels and commit visa fraud in order to have a child here and then just go back to their home country. So this is something that does need to be addressed, whether it's through a Supreme Court ruling or a constitutional amendment, because birthright citizenship is just being abused. And if we tie up all these perverse incentives and we make it so that companies actually follow the law, then eventually the incentives will flip and people will just want to naturally self-deport. And that's a much more peaceful solution to the undesirable situation that no one wants to get ugly. So, as is probably clear by now, I support full deportations. I just want it to be done as peacefully and humanely as possible. And by the way, both Democratic and Republican presidents understood that deportations need to happen. As a matter of fact, Obama deported more people than Trump, about 3 million over the course of his presidency. And I say this acknowledging that Trump was originally only president for 4 years, and the rate of deportation is similar between them. And the manner in which these deportations happened was very similar. In Obama's case, 2/3 of the people deported had either minor infractions or no additional crime besides the original crime of entering the country illegally when they were deported. Many of these people had already been in the country for years and had children who were US citizens. And as a side note, over the next 4 years, pay very close attention to the media's portrayal of Trump's deportations versus Obama's very similar deportations. In conclusion here, the strongest arguments for not deporting people aren't logical, they're emotional. I think that many people are understandably emotionally resistant to the idea of deporting illegal immigrants and are trying to find economic justifications to justify it. And that's because deporting humans sucks. Disrupting the lives of individuals sucks. And we should recognize that there is a real pain for the people whose lives are going to be disrupted by being deported. These are responsible adults who made a decision, and that decision has consequences. So emotions matter, and we should hold space for that, while not forgetting that emotional decisions ruin countries.